Welcome to the Small Church Podcast, where faith, community, and ministry intersect in the unique context of smaller congregations. I'm your host, Tony Marr, and I'm thrilled to be joined by two men who are convinced they're a little bit more talented than I am.
That is right. I'm Robert Kill, one of those supposedly more talented guys, co-host and fellow small church leader. Together, we're here to explore the challenges, triumphs, and inspiring stories within the tight-knit communities that make up our smaller churches.
And I'm Bruce Montgomery, the one here to bring even more to the table than these two and offer a unique perspective to our conversation.
So whether you believe this talent hierarchy or not, you're in for a treat. If you're a pastor, a church member, or just curious about the world of leadership, you're in the right place.
Each episode, we dive into topics that matter to you, from innovative ministry ideas to navigating the unique dynamics of a smaller congregation.
So grab your cup of coffee, settle in, and let's journey together through the wonderful tapestry of small church life.
This is the Small Church Podcast.
Well, hello, and whether it's morning or afternoon or middle of the night, we are super glad you are joining us. I am Robert, the supposedly smarter one of the crew, or at least one of them.
I think that's been pretty well established.
We have lost the wisest of our crew today, though, and we have replaced Bruce with Lola, the sleepiest looking Great Pyrenees you will ever meet, and sweetest.
She's a pretty lazy dog. Yeah.
She looks sleepy. She's always running around when I show up.
She doesn't run much. She really doesn't.
She runs to get to the van that I'm in so that she can then follow me in and lay down beside the chair. And
she's excited that you're here.
Yeah, want me to pet her because apparently you all don't give her any attention.
She's looking right now with like anticipation that she's going to jump up onto the chair, but then she's thinking,
"That's so much.
I weigh too much. That's way too much work for me to."
So much work to do, and so she's going to move around. So anyway, yeah. Hey, how is Tony Marr today?
Doing great, man. Excited to be here with you. Missing Bruce already. Not seeing his smiley, happy face. With us here, but excited to be here with you.
Yeah, it's an interesting episode that I have nothing. I have nothing new to talk about. Nothing's going on in life that's popped up. Like we're in baseball season at my house, and so we've got three boys. I mentioned in a previous episode. I'm not as smart as when these things air. You do all the hard work. I just show up and talk, and so I'm not sure when this will actually air, but I've got one kid that's heading on tour this summer playing music. I've got another one that is playing some soccer and doing some things. And then our busy child right now is baseball, and it's 5 days a week of practice, and games start, early March. So whenever this drops, we've got a lot of games. He's playing 3, 4, 5 games a week sometimes. And it's just such a busy sport.
So I do have something that I want to bring up that you mentioned in our last episode. Our last week's episode, we talked about we talked about ways that you can find joy.
Yeah.
All right. And so you talked about at the beginning of the show the Apple show. Ted Lasso.
We
talked quite a bit about Ted Lasso. You made a statement. You actually, it wasn't a statement. You said something in that piqued my curiosity, and you kind of just answered it with you talking about your middle child and his athleticism and what he does there. But I want to know, now that you are a Ted Lasso aficionado, what do you call the sport where you kick around a little ball and it goes and you try with the attempted goal of scoring a goal into a goal with a net?
With 95% of the people in my life, I call it soccer. But we have been so blessed to have, and I genuinely feel this way. I'm so thankful that years of working at the semi-pro level of soccer, doing creative stuff and photography, graphic design, video work, things like that. I've literally worked with people from about 25, 30 different countries. And so we have so many friends that have sat in our house that we feel super thankful to know. And I will, if they're talking football and pitch and those types of things, I will call it football and pitch and talk, just moving the conversation along. I don't call it soccer and field and things like that.
You said in last week's episode, you were talking about their uniforms and you said their kit.
Kit man.
And I thought,
Yeah.
So
Well, that's what they call him in the show. And so I actually don't even know how to the uniform guy. Is that what we would
I was just
call
wondering
it?
if you were now a snooty footballer.
So I have a bad habit of picking up things like that. So we did mission trips in South Texas and Mexico for a few years. Instead of saying fajita when I came home, I'd be like fajita, and I would start changing the
You're
way
that guy.
I am a little bit. And I don't do it necessarily on purpose. It's just in a culture, I'll start to adapt to the things that they say and do, and people, it's one of those things like I'm not walking around wearing a sombrero. Like my buddies from Mexico, they're always like, "Do you want to know how to find the tourist?" And I'm like, "How?" They're like, "Find the dude in the big huge sombrero," because nobody wears those unless you're in a mariachi band. And so I'm like, "Got it." And so we didn't walk around with big sombreros, although I did buy 2 really huge sombreros and bring them home. Like I do adapt to some things that I think if culturally it gives me a chance to have a couple conversations, I will. But I don't know that soccer pitch, football, the kind of field things do that. But
I have a great sombrero story for you if you want to hear it. It's completely completely off topic.
I would love.
I don't
I
know
would
that our
love to
listeners
hear it.
want to hear it, but they can't object right now. So
Well, we have no additional segments today. I mean, like we just I call it overlooking. Call it. We just want to talk about what we're talking about today.
you're calling me out right now as being unprepared for this week's
No,
episode.
no, I'm not. Like we talk about these things all the time, and I mean, not as much as I should, but I send ideas and things, and sometimes it's just like, even with the ideas, we're like, let the topic work itself, and yeah, there we go. And that's what we're doing today.
So it's story time with Tony right
It's
now.
story time with Tony to make up for all the other stuff we're
This
not doing.
is a ministry story, and so maybe we should edit this out and put it in our episode a couple of weeks ago where we talked about funny things that happened in ministry, because this is a doozy that should have happened. I was a youth pastor and was leading a trip of students to do a week-long spring break missions trip in Mexico, and this was. I've got to set the stage a little bit here to really make the story work well. The story stands well on its own, but with some background, it really pops. This is my first year as a full-time lead student ministry pastor. I had worked as an associate student ministry pastor before, a high school pastor before. This was my first time leading the entire student ministry. I was 21. I was probably 22 years old. I think I was 22 years old. And this was March of 2002. So do the math on that. We are sitting like 4 months outside of the biggest terrorist attack that our country has ever faced. And I am leading a group of 40 high school students out of the country 4 months after the September 11th terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. So our country is already at a heightened state of fear with travel, international travel, especially going across the border, all of this. And me as a 22-year-old first-time youth pastor, I'm leading a group of 40 high school students for a week into Cuernavaca, Mexico, there are 2 different Cuernavaca, Mexicos I have since found out. One is a beautiful resort town on the coast in Mexico, on the Gulf. This is not that Cuernavaca.
That's where you were, right?
This is not that Cuernavaca. And so we spent a week doing a VBS program for a village that within this village, a nice house was 3 cinder block walls and a blue tarp as a roof and dirt floors. Okay, it was the poorest of the poor, and an amazingly incredible experience. I had a backpack that I carried with me everywhere that had all of my student and adult leaders' religious FMTs, religious VSETs and FMT, and their birth certificates or passports. Because border crossing ain't no joke.
No.
Border crossing especially ain't no joke 4 months after the largest terrorist
After
attack
9/11,
in
yeah.
the history of our nation. So we finish up our week. It's an incredible week. We're back at base camp. We have loaded up the vehicles, including the 15-passenger rental van that I am driving that is towing our U-Haul trailer that has all of our tents, all of our equipment. We slept in tents the whole week at base camp. All of our bags, everything like that. The kids in my van have gone and put their travel backpacks and pillows and blankets and all that stuff in the van. I have put my bag in the van. We're ready to go. We go back to our tent site to circle up and pray one more time for safe travels, okay? In the 10 minutes that we were outside of the view of our van, we some locals came in from the local village, Cuernavaca, broke out the big window of the side of the van and stole all of our bags, including my bag that had all of our passports, birth certificates, and religious visas in them, gone. So we have like a 12, 13-hour drive back home to Las Vegas that's awaiting us. And we have this major issue. So the federales come out to the base camp. They take some notes, and we get an agreement with them that they will allow us to send all of our students across the border with another church, a partnering church that's also from Las Vegas, but they will not allow me to go across the border with our van that has all of our supplies unless I can get a police report showing why we don't have all of our documentation to get across the border. So me and my translator, who is a guy named Robert, who grew up in San Antonio,
Not me.
Texas, but looks every bit of a Mexican national, okay? He and I go to the local federale office and to work on this police report. 2 hours of the officer asking me a question, Robert translating it, me giving an answer, Robert translating it back, him asking another question, Robert translating it, me giving an answer, Robert translating it back. 2 hours after this, I finally hear a word that I understand. The officer from the federale's office, who is sitting in an office that looks like everything that you've ever seen in any TV show or movie about a Mexican federale's office. It's got a flickering, dim yellow fluorescent light overhead that keeps sizzling, and he is typing away on an Apple IIgs computer. After 2 hours of translations, I finally hear the word that I understand. It's oops. He says, oops, and then pushes back from his chair and stares at his computer. I look at Robert. I said, what's oops mean? He says, oops means oops. I said, no, what is oops means oops? He had hit a wrong button and deleted everything. So he had to do the entire process over again. So
No Command Z.
No Command Z. Not on the Apple IIgs. So this time we were able to speed up the process a little bit because we've already been through it once. And so an hour and a half later, Robert and I are walking out of the federale's office with our documentation to get ourselves, our van, and our trailer back across the border. So we get to the border crossing. I'm driving the van. Robert is riding shotgun, and he is dressed. He is fully embracing his Hispanic heritage. He is wearing a giant sombrero and a poncho, one of those really itchy ponchos, that you buy from the street vendors in Tijuana, that he is very proud of as he is sitting in the passenger seat riding shotgun. We pull up to the Mexican-U.S. border, and the very friendly, and if you've ever worked with border crossing, you know that I say that with the utmost
Sarcasm that you possibly can.
Yeah. The very friendly lady leans out of her little booth and asks the question that she asks every person of the 10,000 that she is going to encounter at the border crossing this day. She says, state your name, state your citizenship. So I look at her and say, Tony Marr, United States of America. She looks over. Robert, in full garb of sombrero and poncho, leans over and says, Robert, Texas, and gives the hook 'em horns sign to the lady in the booth. She didn't find this very amusing. She didn't like that he was embracing his Hispanic heritage by wearing his sombrero and his poncho. And she looked at him and said, Sir, Texas is not a country. And at that, we have 3 armed guards with M16s that are pointed at us. Already a very long story, getting just a little bit shorter. We spend the next 2.5 hours sitting on the curb as armed guards go through every single piece of luggage in our U-Haul. All because Robert wanted to wear his sombrero, his poncho,
And act like
he
Texas
could
is a
not
country.
understand the answer to the question, your citizenship, Texas, you are not a citizen of Texas, much to the dismay and disagreement of many people who are from Texas who do consider themselves to be their own country.
And I don't necessarily feel this way. I have a lot of friends in Texas, but there's a lot of people in the United States that wish they were their own country. So
And that's story time with Tony.
that is my least favorite thing about traveling with people that I don't have control over. Like with my kids, I feel like I can look at them and say, hey, we're not going to be a moron for the next 11 minutes because they will put you in jail. Not just me. You think, oh, it'll be funny. Dad will get cuffed, thrown on the ground, hold a gun to his head. No, they will put you in jail. Like they don't care. They have no preference about, oh, well, he's a minor. They will arrest your butt and put you in jail. And this is no good. And so it always makes me nervous traveling. Certain people, especially as a student pastor, I mean, doing youth ministry and things, it is so hard, so scary to. And 9/11 did not make that easier. I don't know that I could have done a trip. Like there's a couple of people who speak, pastors that I listen to, and people ask them, how did you get, how did you get to do this? And he said, I just didn't say no. And they're like, what do you mean? They're like, well, 9/11 happened. There was a lot of people who wouldn't fly. And he's like 9:15, I was back on a plane. Somebody's like, hey, so-and-so canceled. Will you come speak? He's like, yes. And he's like, I just wasn't scared. I got on a plane. If God wants to take me out on a plane, he can take me out. And so he's like, this is probably the safest we're ever going to be. But I don't know. I don't know that I would have been that brave to
For me,
have
it
done
was
it.
total ignorance.
Well,
I didn't know any better. I was too young and dumb.
yeah, I'd have been. I was brought up to be very nervousy.
Way
So,
overconfident, I think. Way overconfident. Yeah. So our episode today
yes.
was the inspiration came from this in our episode last week when we were talking about how to find joy in ministry. And we got to the part where we were trying to actually not just give theoretical or philosophical answers to our listeners, but we're trying to give some actual practical tips of things that they could do. And one of the things that we discussed was regularly evaluating your strategy in ministry. And as we were talking through that, and as I was preparing for that episode and thinking through what I wanted to talk about in light of that, I was thinking that so often, in order for any strategy to be successful, you have to have measures of success, right? It's not an effective strategy if there's not some sort of measure of how do we know if the strategy is working. And we talked about how it's important to reevaluate your strategy, maybe even upwards of quarterly, that we said, because times change, situations change, circumstances change. But those measures, oftentimes the measures that we're looking at, the measures that society, and especially church society, church leadership society, have told us are the measures of success in ministry, many times set us up to fail before we even begin. And so in response to that and in inspiration of that discussion that we had last week, I thought, why don't we do an episode talking about the rethinking of measures of success in ministry? It's something that I work through a lot with the churches that I have the honor to work with and consult with, is rethinking those measures. And I know that we've got a lot of listeners out there the majority of our listeners out there that hasn't had a church consulting group sit down with them and talk through all of this. And so this may be the closest they ever get to that. So I wanted to spend some time discussing that and talking through that. There was a book many, many years ago, it's probably 20, 25 years old now, by Ed Stetzer called Comeback Churches. Not sure if you ever read that one or not.
I've seen a lot of highlights from it. I haven't read it.
In Comeback Churches, he talks about the ABCs of church growth. And this is not mine. This is all from Ed Stetzer, that he talks about the ABCs of church growth, which are the common metrics that we have for how we reflect and measure our church successfulness, our church health. And those ABCs are attendance, buildings, and cash. That the general metrics of success and church health are you growing? Are you seeing growth from week to week, month to month, year to year? Are your buildings growing? Are you expanding your facilities, improving your facilities, building new facilities? Are you seeing that you're planting new churches, building new campuses, starting new programs, all of the things that happen within your building and around your building? And how is your offering? We've gone so far to have detailed articles and reports that will tell you, based on your size of church and the age of your church, here's what your PPG, per person giving, should be. The church leadership world has identified and done all of the statistical analysis on if you are a healthy church, what your PPG, your per person giving, should be each week in your congregation. And that tends to be what we look at as a church, regardless of size, regardless of age, regardless of location. That tends to be what we look at, and what we judge and base our success off of is what was our attendance. For most of our small churches, most of our small churches in the area probably have somewhere in their church atrium, their church lobby, their church entrance, or maybe even in their sanctuary, they have a board from the 1970s that says today's attendance, last week's attendance, today's offering. And they put those numbers up there for everyone to see and everyone to judge, right? Maybe there's a different way to look at church success. Maybe there's a different way for us to judge and assess church health than simply just looking at attendance, buildings, and cash.
Yeah, I mean it's tough, and and I'm really thankful for the people. And again, if somebody's hopping in and you're just joining the first time, I work at a church that's a network of churches. So we have 3 campuses. We are a church that plants churches. The largest you will probably see any of our campuses get to is the 250 to 325 range, and then we're looking to send 50, 75 people out to go plant a church somewhere in another community around where we live. And so I'm thankful because of what we do and how we do it, that there's people who pay attention to the finances, there's people who pay attention to the buildings, that we keep an eye on attendance. I mean, there are some really good things about all of these measures, but I don't know that they are the prime attributes that should be looked at week in and week out to decide whether or not a church is successful or struggling. Because at the end of the day, like, and I appreciate his great analogy, alliteration, ABCs. Is that whichever one of those words?
Alliteration, yeah.
There we go. Thank you. I'm terrible. I always am messing up different things. I'm terrible with that kind of stuff. But the alliteration there, I appreciate the ABCs and the attendance, buildings, and cash. Generosity is a viable growth
Absolutely,
opportunity
it
in
is.
our lives.
Sure.
And we want to see people growing in the discipline, in the principle of generosity. We want to see people, we should, just like God's told us that our bodies are a temple, he's blessed us with buildings and facilities, and we should want to care for the things that God has given us. If the building is important, and I think you and I would both make a strong case that it definitely has its place and is important in the overall scheme, we should take care of the building and we should care for those things. And at the end of the day, if your church is declining every week, I don't know that I would want to see that on a board immortalized for everyone in the world to see. But whether you're looking at it on a board in front of your church, or you're looking at it on a handwritten, legal pad, or a Excel spreadsheet, however you're seeing that, there is some value in measuring those things.
But the data's flawed. And what I mean by that is that the latest data, the latest trends say that if you are a healthy church, a spiritually healthy church, you should be at 18 PPG. So $18 per week per person that goes to your church. Okay. If you are excelling, you should be at 21 to 22. And then there's also numbers that say if you're a church plant, so if you're 2 years, your number should be around 23, because people tend to give more to new church work that they're excited about and passionate about. And so if you're new, so you've got all of these different numbers, 18 to 23, somewhere in that range. If you are a spiritually healthy church, what that doesn't take into account is the small rural church that's a farming community, and those people make $30,000 a year. So their healthy giving maybe 10%, if you want to set that number on it as a gauge for healthy giving. Maybe they're 10%. 10% of $30,000 a year is much, much less than 10% of $150,000
Sure.
a year. And so to say $18 per person, the numbers don't always add up. Maybe your people don't have that much money to give.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so the data is skewed. The data is not accurate. And so I think that we can get so caught up. I've been there in
Yeah.
ministry looking at all of that data and having the financial reports given and going with my operations team and saying, here's where we're at, here's where we need to be. Maybe we need to talk more about this because according to this measure, we're not a very healthy church. We're coming in at 1650, per person. And if your church is more pushing towards young families, say that you've got a lot of families that have 4 or 5 kids, your PPG accounts for children as well. And so the difference between a church that is primarily singles or married young adults with no kids versus a church of seniors, Bruce has talked to us before that the vast majority of his church is seniors. I would think that PPG is going to be significantly higher than a congregation whose main demographic is young families with lots of kids.
Yeah, no, and I would say too that, man, like you do things in your daily life. I couldn't, if some gun to my head, I could not have told you the numbers you just rattled off. And so when I say that we look at these concepts and these ideas, we talk about these from the fact of that as a group of churches, as a staff, I think there's about, and this is terrible. We've had a couple of changes recently. I think there's about 15, 16 of us on staff between 3 campuses. Most of those are bivocational. But like inside of that space, like we talk about a budget and we put a budget together and then we work through that budget.
Important to do.
Yes, but we don't, like, we would have never sat down and said our giving per person, like I'm sure that maybe the finance guy sits in a room and, gets out his, beautiful mind glasses and starts to look. But as far as the staff, I don't spend 1 second in that space breaking down, oh, here's how much we're getting per person. We need I've never thought about that. I'm going to rephrase that. In the last 5 years of serving in church the way that since 2019, I know for a fact, since 2019, I have not thought about numbers in that way. And so I do pay attention and I know what our budget is and I know what we need to bring in weekly to accomplish the ministry that we feel like we need to. But I tend to work more from the angle of talking about So for me personally, I'm not feeling the stress because I would totally agree. If we're sitting down going, it's $18 a person, and we're kind of yelling that from the pulpit, or we're yelling that in the board meeting, or whatever it is we're doing, I think the shift is wrong. The focus is wrong. The focus is wrong. We got to shift that. Sorry, I said those words backwards. But if somebody's dealing with that, man, I would say I'm really sorry. Like, I'm sorry that's where you are. And I could see, kind of like we talked about last time, I probably wouldn't have a ton of joy in ministry either if I felt like every day all that was being looked at me was just said, hey, you've got to get an extra 62 cents a person.
Yeah. Well, Robert, we've had many, many conversations, some on mic, many off mic.
A lot more off mic than on.
And I've heard the frustration come out in you several times. I don't know. I guess frustration is the right word, but maybe also disappointment of, man, our attendance was down this week.
I feel it.
And
yeah.
And so I think that maybe if we had other things that we were looking at, not saying that if you see that you have a continual pattern of decline in your church, it's something you need to be aware of. All right. It's something you need to be aware of. If you see that we're not meeting our church budget, our people just simply aren't giving at all, like you said before, that does show an unhealthy church spiritual atmosphere there, okay? That we're not growing our people in spiritual maturity, because that should be a reflection of our faith. But if there were other measures as well that we could be looking at, that we can identify and be assessing as a team, as a leadership team, that we're all shooting at the same bullseye together, we're all aiming at the same thing, that I think that can help us find joy, going back to last week's episode, in some of the things. This morning in preparation for this, I read an article by, and You talked last episode about messing up people's names. I'm going to
Yeah.
butcher this guy's name. You've quoted
I
him
will
before.
probably not be helpful.
Yeah, you've quoted him before on our show. You've talked to him. Carey Nieuwhof.
Carey Nieuwhof.
Nieuwhof.
I do know that one. Yeah.
Respect him a lot.
Yeah, great leader.
Great leader. Never met the guy in my life,
Yeah.
but respect the heck out of him. Really great dude. Seems to way smarter than I am on all of this stuff. Borderline up where you're at. I would say not close to Bruce, but right there. He wrote an article recently that the title, I'm just going to read it straight to you. The New Church Metrics. 6 things pastors should start and stop measuring. It's like, yeah, this is going to be great. This is going to support everything that we're going to talk about today. And then I read it and I'm like, man, he's right there with everything else. 4 things to start measuring. And again, huge fan of this guy. All right. Read a lot of his articles. With where we're going today and where I'm at, I feel like this misses the mark. Number of first time connections is what we should be looking at. This is according to him. Number of people who take a first step, average duration of views. So he said one of our main church metrics is that we should be looking at how long people are staying on our podcast, staying on our MP3 sermons and our YouTube channel. And he even says this is different than a 1 minute or 10-minute view because it tells you how long on average people watched or listened to your service or video. And tracking average duration can help you determine so much. And then his 4th is the engagement with online viewers and subscribers. That should be a measure of success, is how a metric of your success is how you are engaging with your online viewers and subscribers. All of those things to me only put more pressure on the pastor that now we've got to add more to our workload, that we've got to be sure that we're interacting and connecting with these people online. We've now got to go and look at all the data on how long people are watching, and if they're not watching long enough, if they're turning out, what does that say about my sermons? What does that say about my message? And then things that he says to stop measuring is any attendance figure involving a multiplier, which there are books and books out there about how to accurately do your attendance with multipliers, and I think it's ridiculous. Carey agrees on this, that there are a lot of churches who use multipliers like 1.4, 1.7, even 2 times if per leader that is there, because they have families there that maybe don't get counted, or maybe they stepped out, and so you put multipliers on people. I think that's absolutely shady and ridiculous. And so I loved that he said that. But then he also said, don't count 3-second views. So back to the online views, which is I would agree with that. As I look at our analytics for our show, it'll tell you, it won't even count someone as a view, as a audience member, unless they have listened for a certain duration. They don't even count it. And so he's saying you can't count your 3-second views, someone that's just popped on and popped right back off. But I'm not sure. Again, it's all tied to these numbers of eyes that are viewing, either in person or online. And we're attaching our success to the number of eyes that are seeing what we're doing. And I just think that while a valuable tool, should not be one of our primary measures of success.
Yeah, and look, you're absolutely right. There are days that I'm going, man, our numbers aren't where they have been. And the reason that I get focused on that is because I take it personal. And the reason I take it personal is because it has been what the measuring stick has been for so long that, and I'm not acting like that we have it perfect where I work at. I'm not acting like that at all. I think there's still some things, and we have some really good conversations, and we have some really hard conversations around what's the right thing to talk about. Like sometimes, we're doing a survey or asking a question or something like that, and one person will word it, and somebody else, me, or I'll word a question, and somebody will kind of say, hey, or somebody will word something, and I'll go be like, hey, have you thought about what's how we word this matters, how we say this matters. And so I don't disagree. I don't disagree with what you said, and you definitely like are right in the fact that I struggle inside of some of these things. But then the tension comes in is how do you shift that culture? It's a little easier and harder for me as a part of a network. But if someone's sitting on an island, we'll call it. If somebody's in a standalone church, just them, 30 people, 50 people, 70 people showing up every week. Maybe you got a large church, 500 or 600 people or more, and you're showing people showing up every week. How do you turn the Titanic? How do you move those types of things in the space? Because my concern is, um, it's what was it? Rich Mullins used to sing, "It's like a screen door on a submarine." It's just one of these things that we try and get to, and how do you change that?
Yeah, I think that how you change that metric is easier than we might think. I think it's just communication and reestablishing what those measures are. And so that can start with you as the leader and communicating with your leadership, whatever your leadership whatever
Well, and I was
whatever your
going to
leadership
say,
structure is,
yeah,
and it is a leadership struggle oftentimes, but that was a little slip there. Whatever your leadership structure is, if you're elders, deacons, staff led, whatever that is, it's open communication within your leadership, and then moving that communication to your congregation as a whole as to these are the things that we are measuring. So many churches, I never did this. You guys might do this. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. We do this as a nonprofit ministry, but I never did this in church work, is an annual report at the end of the year that goes out to the congregation that says, here's what our year looked like. Here's everything that we did. And most of the time, those focus on those ABCs. That's the big majority of it is, here's where our attendance was last year. Here's where it has grown this year. Here's where our average giving was. Here's where it was. Here's where our budget was for last year. Here's where our budget is this year, and how much more we've been able to raise as a church and spend as a church, and what we've been able, to contribute to missionaries. And we celebrate all those things, as we should. We definitely should. And then it's, here's the new things that we've done to our building, to our facilities. And we fall right into this trap because that's what we've been conditioned to do. And so as leaders, if we could say, okay, we're also our annual report, the things that we celebrate, the things that we communicate, the things that we talk about in our meetings as our measures of success, the things that we communicate with our congregation and with our people as our measures of success, we're going to start looking at these things, maybe in place of or in addition to the things that we've already been looking at. That starts to change the culture and that starts to change the DNA, but it has to be talked about and communicated that these are the things that we're actually looking at.
Yeah, and for me, and I think this gets to be a little bit complicated. In part of this, it shouldn't in my brain, but again, I think I'm right. So this is, it's always easy when you think you're right, and not that anybody else is wrong. It's just if you're not thinking like me, you might be wrong. I'm so not saying anybody out there is wrong. The tension for me, where I'm sitting at recently, is, and you hear me say this stuff a lot. If you hear me say names like Dallas Willard and John Ortberg and John Mark Comer, you start seeing this path of discipleship that I'm going down a little bit. And it's not just those guys. I'm really looking at Jesus and where he told us to go and what he told us to do. We're teaching through some Old Testament things right now. And so I'm getting the chance to really live a little deeper in what God was doing through Israel and how he was moving in some space there. And I think we've missed the mark. Let me say it this way. I have missed the mark as a leader on making discipleship, following Jesus, the only metric that matters to get measured.
So how do you measure that?
Well, I think John 10 talks about you're known by your fruit. And I think if you're sitting around, Maxwell's, and we've both said this at different times in the time on the podcast, if you think you're leading, you turn around, no one's following, you're only taking a walk. If you look out at your congregation and you're seeing a group of people that aren't moving that aren't moving towards Jesus, that people aren't rallying around. You're not hearing stories of life change. You're not seeing those things happen. If you're looking at yourself and you're going, I have a lot of really good war stories. Back in the day, I remember I used to do this and I really was out there and things, and you've been telling the same story for 7 years. You might not be investing in discipling and moving that needle people. I don't know. I'm really in some of these spaces. I'm starting to just really kind of create some metrics around this. I think a lot of people would say is that disciples that make disciples. So if you are using the word disciple or apprentice or however you want to phrase those things, if you get to the true kind of biblical thing is we should be people as we follow Jesus that bring other people along. And as we bring them along, they should be bringing people along with them. And so there should be people that they start to, as they invest and as they lead and as people kind of come to follow Jesus, and they are over kind of in that realm and they're discipling and leading them, you should see a trail of people that are starting to go.
I agree with you 1,000%. I think what you're saying is 100% accurate. I worry that maybe it's a little too philosophical.
Maybe.
And so, but what tends
But
to
I
happen
live every
there,
day of my life setting the strategy around these things of how do I do this with 2 people in my church
Yeah.
while I understand everyone else isn't going to jump on board with this.
But I think the communication in that, what needs to happen in the communication with that, Robert, is what you just said, what you just spelled out, hopefully is spelled out to your congregation.
Sure.
But what needs to also be added to that is that may not always result in them coming to church here.
True.
And that's okay.
Or
That's
at all
okay.
for a season.
Right. But they can be having significant impact on the people that they work with, the people that are their neighbors, the people that they sit on the baseball field with during their kids' practice or the soccer field on their kids' practice, and have incredible impact and influence on them spiritually, and they may never come to your church. And so what we've done in the past is we said if we don't see that number, that work and that effort translating to butts in the pews here, then we can't count that as a success. And so it's a paradigm shift. It really is a paradigm shift. I do think, though, that there are some tangible things that we can look at as a church, regardless of size, regardless of location, regardless of resources, that we can look at as identifiable, tangible measures, numerical things that we can look at to all be on the same page and say, are we a spiritually healthy, a spiritually vibrant church? That have nothing to do with those ABCs, regardless of your, but they require some work. Okay,
And it requires a shift of thinking of the entire leadership.
It really does. But if you're a church who is sitting in rural Kentucky, that nobody ever moves into your community, your population sign when you walk into the middle of your county and it says population of this county is whatever, that number hasn't changed in 15 years. It's helped the city budget a lot because they haven't had to get a new sign. And you're just not going to see that exponential growth in the numerics of your church. And so you can be frustrated going by the traditional metrics. What if you said, we are going to judge our health, our spiritual health of our congregation by, you mentioned this earlier, by a discipleship program that we take people through. So the 25 people that go to our church, that we want to challenge you, encourage you, and lead you through a discipleship program that's going to take 6 months, 8 months, 12 months. And at the end of the year, you can say, yeah, we maybe started the year with 25 people. Now we have 25 people. But we took 15 people through this process that January 1, 2024, they were here. Now, January 1, 2025, they are here. That's something to celebrate. That's something huge to celebrate. Another huge thing that I think that is something that I was really big on in my churches, especially in new church work, is the impact that you're having in the community. That you should measure, and if you're not doing this as a church, you need to start right now. I'm not talking I am talking your church, but I'm talking to all of our listeners out here. If you don't know within your community, so Robert, you're in Unicoi County, Irwin is your church. If you don't know, and I'm going to be really bold here, okay? I'm going to step on some toes. Maybe not, because I think you might already be doing this because you're a great leader. Not to say if you're not a great leader. I'm digging myself.
I may not be. I don't have a clue.
If you don't know what the homeless rate is in your community, if you don't know what the crime rate is in your community, if you don't know what the divorce rate is in your community, if you don't know what the dropout rate is in your community, if you don't know all of those things, shame on you. Because as a leader in that community, you should know all of those things. And as the body of Christ, we should be making a tangible difference in our communities. And so, if you want to know, regardless of the size of your church, regardless of the resources of your church, if you want to know if you are being the body of Christ and you are being a healthy Christian, you said they should know us by our love. The fruits of our labor is a great way to measure. If you can't see that as a direct result of the work of the people who call this place their home, that the suicide rate has gone down in our community. The crime rate has gone down in our community. The divorce rate has gone down in our community. The high school dropout rate has gone down in our community. The substance abuse rate has gone down in our community. You should be able to see that us being here in this community is making a difference in the community. We should see that as a church. And that's something that any church, regardless of size, regardless of influence, regardless of resources, can have an impact on. And we should be charting that. We should be looking at that. It's a great way to measure spiritual health of a church, is the impact we're having on our community.
And in transparency, I don't know all of those. I know a lot of them, but I don't know all of those. But yeah, I mean, we live in a town. I mean, like our town, and this, and I love our town. I absolutely love the space that I serve in and the people that are there and things. But, it is, I mean, the median household income in Unicoi County is $40,000 a year, a little less than it actually is, like 39.7 or something, right in that range. And so, I mean, but you think that's mom and dad. That's both people in the household make a collectively less than 40 grand a year. Like even in a small town in 2024, that's not much money. It's very hard to live and function in that space. And so, like I said, there's over 80 churches in our town, and this sounds braggy, that I'm aware of. We're the second or third largest church in our space, and we're one of 3 that average over 100 people. And like there's just that needle of like moving things. It's just it's hard to see when there's so much that goes on. There is a pretty heavy dropout rate of school. There's a lot of kids that either don't finish or get a GED and go and work. We have a lot of factories and fields and things, and there's nothing against those types of jobs. And I know you would say the same thing. We need people that do all the things, and because all the things are how we live and survive and do. And so our cars don't work if we don't have people that make those parts, and all of us aren't honestly skilled or talented enough to put those things together. But it's just a different community. And if, like you said, if you're in a small town in Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and you're in these little small towns that you're going, man, like you can feel very intimately a part of things that really, really matter, like the school system, like the adoption and foster care. You can get very intimately involved in things that really impact your community, that are being the heart of Jesus, that are caring for people in a really simple, I mean, and I know that sounds bad, but in a really simple way, and your people can really make a monstrous difference.
And so how we talk over and over, and there are books and books and articles and studies by Barna and Gallup that are coming out every few months that talk about the decline of Christianity in Western civilization. How much of that, and I don't have the answer to this, I'm just wondering how much of that is because we base our success on the number of eyes that are watching us and the number of dollars that they're giving, rather than the impact that they're having on the world around them. How much different would the church look if we were measuring our success as a church, not on how many people were coming to our services on Sunday, or how many people were watching our live stream online, how many people were giving, writing, or tithing each week or each month or each year or each quarter, but rather that we have seen, man, we had 15% of our people this year that went through a Bible literacy program. That we had 20% of our people that went through a relational evangelism program, we saw that as a direct result of the moving of the Holy Spirit within our church community and in our people's lives, that we saw that we were able to provide these marriage recovery programs. We were able to provide these literacy programs. We were able to provide, this prison ministry work and help reestablish felons that have been released back into being vibrant members of the community, that we were having an actual tangible impact on our community besides taking up parking spaces or causing traffic on Sunday mornings.
Yeah, I mean, and the one thing I'll say is our church has a process that we do. It's actually a couple of year journey. There's some things that we talk about of kind of scaling that back, but it is a process of working people through what it means to be a disciple, what it means to you talked about relational evangelism or these types of things, and having conversations with people the way Jesus had conversations with people. How do you sit in a space and talk to people about life that eventually lead to things about faith, and it leads to maybe something even deeper down the road. And those, Jesus did those things in 4 verses. We do them over 4 or 5 months, 4 or 5 years. I mean, we have no clue, but those are things that matter, because in those spaces, what we find is we see people in our church who have an interest. So one lady really had a passion for helping kids that just knew they didn't have clothes in the schools, and she was around that. She came in one day and looked at a couple of us on staff and just said, "Hey, I'd really like to do something to partner with the school and see how we could provide coats in the winter and do this." And I mean, our church came in, and I think they brought it was like, again, it's about a coat a person. And then that's a ton. I mean, it's like every person in our church brought in a coat.
And let me ask you a question, okay?
And I didn't do anything other than talk to that lady about what it means to love people well, because Jesus loves us well.
Let me ask you a question, and this is an unfair question.
Sure.
What do you think that Jesus prized more? That those people providing coats for cold kids and cold families in the winter, or sitting and observing a church service on Sunday morning?
Oh, I definitely think given the coats and that's, I don't like the generosity talk during the welcome. We have to do them. It's just part of life. Maybe we don't have to do them. Sorry. I'm going to say we do them, and you may have a totally different opinion, and we do them. We talk about generosity, though. We try to talk about giving. There is a heart thing in generosity. So we talk about that, but my favorite thing is we do so much in our community and around that most of the time I can say, "Hey, I just want to thank you for your generosity." Many of you give this way, or this way. We do online. We have an app, and then they can give in person. But let me tell you what your generosity did this week. Let me tell you a story about, and we can do that, 52 weeks a year. I mean, we can do that 35 weeks a year out of the 52, that we can tell a personal story. Here's what happened because of your generosity. Here's a difference that was made because of your heart towards this community. Here's something that happened, and I understand you physically couldn't be there, but this happened. So I don't love the generosity talk, but in that space, this lady came in and said, "There's kids who are freezing. They're standing out on the corner." I mean, and it's cold where we are. We joke about that some here, but there's some seasons of life. And a couple years ago, I mean, it was literally negative temperatures. It was low single digits, negative temperature as the resting temperature. That doesn't count wind chill. And so you've got kids who have to get on a bus. You've got kids that have got to get to school, and they have nothing. And this lady was broken. I mean, and she was in tears, "Just do this." And so we're like, "We're not the right people to tell this. You need to share this." And she did. I mean, people came out in droves.
That's awesome.
And I think that's the thing is like, Jesus says, "Whatever you did for the least of these." When did we do that, Jesus? Whenever you did this for the least of these, you did this for me. And so that is a part of our path in following Jesus.
And so
that
do
principle.
those things, track those things, celebrate those things, right?
And I think
That's
we
a
do
great measure.
and I think we do a pretty good job of that.
Yeah.
But like I said earlier, my heart is very bent towards the fact of that we're not doing that as well as we can. And I love the fact that the other two campus pastors and our lead pastor that I sit with usually a couple of times a week in some type of conversation, that we're going, man, how do we really focus on discipleship? Or, hey, let me tell you a win that God's doing, is something where we're seeing somebody take a real significant next step in their relationship with Him. And it doesn't come through, and again, I know we need, and I think words sometimes get hard. It doesn't come through a class or a program. It comes through a conversation, that because of maybe of a class or a program, or because of a process, or however you want to word it, to get through that, is you're leading people through following Jesus, whether that is in, a Sunday afternoon thing or an online thing or whatever. We're seeing these individual conversations start, and we're seeing God use one person, one of His disciples, to lead someone else. And in that, then we're seeing huge things start to happen in our communities, and ultimately even around the world, because of some things that we're getting to do with some missionaries and different people who are indigenous people. We're not sending me and you to the middle of some country.
Yeah, I love what you just said there. I want to piggyback on that a little bit, and we're running out of time here. I was the founding lead pastor of a church that had a motto that we had, a slogan that we had that was said almost every week, that we would say, "Don't go to church, be the church." And as you walked out of our $1.3 million auditorium, another story for another day, we left the inner city community and moved out to the suburbs and built a masterful building under my leadership, one of my biggest leadership failures. But as you walked out of this gorgeous, state-of-the-art $1.3 million auditorium, above the doors that every single person who came to our church, it said, "Now go be the church," is what it said. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew it. It was a mantra. We didn't live it out. We didn't live it out correctly. But I think so many of our metrics, so many of our measures are focused on going to church, not being the church.
Yes.
I had and you just talked about that. I had a pastor that I was meeting with. This was a while ago, and I will try not to give any information that would give away who it is. But I was sitting talking with him in his office, in his church office, which with a big window that looked out onto the community, and we're sitting talking and just celebrating things. And he was celebrating with me the number of people, the number of missions trips that his church had done that year, and it was staggering. He talked to me about the number of mission trips that he had been on, and he was in a transition right now to go from, he was still going to be on staff at the church, but he was going from being the lead pastor at the church, teaching 48 out of the 52 weekends a year, that he was still going to be technically a senior pastor at the church, but he was now going to be focusing on missions and leading these mission trips and working with missions organizations. And he was so excited about it and doing great work, going on missions, doing missions work, incredible work, great work, important work, valuable work to the kingdom of God and to the spiritual health of the people in his church. Okay. So I'm not trying to devalue that at all. But literally right across the street from his church, I could see it out of his window, was a housing project. And so I said to him, "Man, that's incredible. How much work have you guys done with the housing project right across the street here?" And he said, "Well, some of those people come to our church." I said, "No, but how many times have you gone to them? What work have you done within that community?" And he didn't have, they're spending tens of thousands of dollars sending their people overseas to do mission work when there's a mission field literally right across the street. He was changing his job to be able to go overseas and work with underprivileged communities when he had an underprivileged community right across the street. And his response when I said, "What are you doing with them?" was, "Well, they're coming to us. Some of them come to our church. Again, let's go to church instead of going to be the church." And I just think so often that's where we've gotten it wrong. And if you're a small church leader who's sitting here looking at all the metrics that church culture is trying to push down your throat, and you're looking at that board in your lobby, and week after week you see the number is staying the same or the number is going down, and the amount of giving is staying the same, and you're getting all of these voices from the outside world telling you you're not successful because your church isn't growing numerically. You're not successful as a ministry leader or as a church because people are not giving the PPG that they should be getting. You're not hitting 18 in your rural underdeveloped community that you're ministering to, and you're feeling discouraged and tired and worn out, and you can't find your joy. Change your measures of success.
And I think as we're just wrapping this up here, like, it can feel a little bit like, if people are just listening, that you and I are on like opposite sides of this thing, maybe like more like really like, here's the next step and things, and I'm a little more philosophical. And in this conversation, we might be. You're a little like, your stuff's a little more the nuts and bolts, and like you said, Rob, it's really good stuff, but it's kind of philosophical. How do you step into that? And the reality is I'm in a very philosophical place right now, and you know that. And so my heart, sometimes I have a hard time shifting that gear, and it takes me a minute. But the thing that you and I would both say is all the things we've talked about today have been part of our ministries, and we could, you and I both could look back and go, you're like, hey, this is a thing where I look back and go, I'm struggling with that decision that I made there. And we can all look back and go, man, I wish I would have done this. And the thing that we can do is we can learn from that past, but we can't let it hold us captive. We've got to look at where we are today and go, okay, maybe I haven't created disciples the way I should. Maybe I haven't stepped into this space the way I should, but I understand this, and God's been tugging at your heart to lead and to not worry about the things that don't matter. And I'm not saying money doesn't matter, because you can't have a building and do things without it, but it can't be the primary focus. And so I love so many things you said there today around those ABCs, and like, hey, put them in their right spot. They are a part of this, but get to the heart of the matter, which is, man, love people and go be where they are.
Awesome. Man, great discussion today. Miss Bruce chiming in on that, but had a great discussion here with Robert today on this edition of the Small Church Podcast. We want to thank you for tuning in to this edition of our show. I know that we've talked about a lot. We've thrown a lot at you, and if you have any questions, any comments, any feedback for us, we would love to hear that from you, as long as it's only positive, please. Just kidding. Robert's shaking his head. No, we would love to hear from you. You can interact with us on Facebook. You can visit us on our website, higherministries.com. Find us on social media. Please like, listen, and subscribe. Leave a review wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Your reviews help other people find us on the platforms, which drives more people into our discussions. This conversation is a discussion that we want to have with you. So again, we would love to hear from you. On behalf of Robert Kell, I am Tony Marr. We're missing Bruce Montgomery. We'll hopefully have him back next week. We hope that you will tune in to the next edition of the Small Church Podcast. Have a great rest of your week.